I went to Catford police station as a sergeant, and it was at Catford that something happened that was to change my my career, my police career, my outlook on policing, and my understanding of policing, and my understanding of the race issue. It was to change it dramatically. After I'd been at Catford for about just over a year, I was called in to see the superintendent, who said, Paul, he said, all Black and Asian officers, yourself included, have to attend a series of 2-day seminars at Bristol Polytechnic. I'm afraid it's not up for discussion. You've got to go. And I just looked at him, and in the back of my mind, I thought, yes, this is it. Someone else has recognized what I've recognized, you know, over these past few years. There's a problem. I immediately thought that. When I took away the bit of paper, I read that the head of personnel and training was concerned that the disproportionate premature resignation of Black and Asian police officers was no longer sustainable for the Metropolitan Police. They needed to bottom out a reason as to why it was happening. And who better to ask than serving Black and Asian police officers? So it was quite a controversial decision to take. It wouldn't be taken today. You know, that based on your color, you were being ordered to attend a 2-day seminar 100 miles away from your home, right? You'll be bussed there and bussed back, and you'll be given, you know, accommodation. And whilst at the 2-day seminar, which was strictly for Metropolitan Police, Black and Asian police officers, you'll be divided into small syndicates, and your views would be canvassed, and your responses would be kind of documented. And it was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. I mean, for me, it was like, this is what we need. This is what we've been waiting for. It just seemed to me to be so natural. But having said it, it was very, very unnatural, because I'd never met more than 3 Black officers. And when I went to Scotland Yard to catch the bus to Bristol, I saw all these Black faces milling around in the foyer at New Scotland Yard. And I remember getting into the lift, and the guy in a white guy in the lift said, "Oh my God," he said, "what's this? United Nations?" And, you know, we all laughed. And so we were at Bristol for 2 days. Why Bristol? Why Bristol Polytechnic? People have asked that question for years and years and years. And I only discovered much later that the reason Bristol was chosen is because they offered the best rates going. There's nothing to do with the geography. They wanted to get us out of London. They wanted us in a safe environment. And Bristol Polytechnic, as it was called in those days, offered the best rate, you know, for a 2-day seminar, accommodation, food, and everything. So that was the reason why we went to Bristol, and no other reason. But they did want us outside of London. They didn't want us to feel that, you know, colleagues could be listening in or whatever. And during that 2 days, yeah, it was a real cathartic experience. And it was an enjoyable experience, and it was a very social experience, and because we didn't feel under any pressure. We didn't feel that we were free from all the kind of racialized comments and stupidity that we would normally encounter in our day-to-day work. And so, of course, it was very enjoyable, and it was, you know, very, very relaxed. And as we were divided into small groups of 10 or 12, and as I say, canvassed by a kind of management consultant. an internal management consultant, and who had asked us a series of questions like, okay, what's going well for you? Yeah, lots of overtime. You know, got my driving course last week, you know, and then what's not going so well? I'm not getting any overtime. I can't get a driving. And, you know, we were being very coy about giving answers. And then I remember after probably about 10 minutes, I said, look, the reason we're here, I'm guessing, is because of racism in the place. And then I said, I suspect it's not really overt stuff, but nevertheless, it's there. And I remember this African guy sitting next to me. He turned to me. He says, what do you know? He said, my inspector called me a black bastard. Is that overt enough? And that was it. The floodgates were open. The floodgate, and people started telling their stories. And that happened in all the syndicates. That happened across the 280 officers that went to Bristol. They recounted their lived experiences, and some were very chilling stories of, and some said, well, you know, I've not encountered that. I've heard the name calling and the language and stuff, but I've never encountered the personal racism. And others said, look, you know, I've had it since day one. My locker was vandalized, my car was graffitied, and and this is what it's like. So much so that the management consultants really didn't know where to go with the information. Do they bring in, because we are police officers, we're all police officers, but we're there talking about, in some cases, criminal acts that have taken place. So how does the organization manage that? Does it bring in people from the complaints and discipline to listen to the story? No, that would have closed everything down. So to ensure that the conversations remained open, they were not kind of managed in any way from a discipline point of view, because clearly some allegations of discipline offences were being made, but so that's how it continued over the 2 days, and there were a number of, you know, buses that went up to Bristol, but at the end of it all, we were promised that something would happen, something would change, and I came home thinking, wow, I want to be a part of that change. I don't know what that change is going to look like, but we've been told by a very senior officer that we, the people who attended Bristol, will be invited to participate in that change. And so I waited and I waited and I waited. And then one day I saw a job advertised in our internal police newsletter. And it was for a post, a permanent post, that had resulted as a consequence of the Bristol staff seminars. And they wanted a sergeant to act as a full-time kind of secretary, coordinator to a number of working groups. I thought, that's it, that's me, that is me. I applied and I got the job. I got the job as the full-time coordinator for the working groups that were going to be established as a result of the Bristol seminars to bring about change in the organisation. And I found myself working at Tintagel House, which was near Vauxhall Bridge. It was a dilapidated old building, Metropolitan Police building, and it'd been the headquarters for the squad investigating the Cray twins, actually. And that was its claim to fame. But yeah, that's where I found myself, with one other black officer. He was a PC, George Roden. You may be familiar with the name. We didn't know what to expect. We had no clue. We were quickly we quickly met some senior people who were overseeing. A guy called David Martin was chief superintendent, and we were told that all the data from Bristol had been crunched and made sense of and placed into a report. And they had distilled from all that information that there was a need to tackle kind of 4 areas of concern. And there will be working groups set up and and it was all very exciting. And I thought, wow, this is real change. After about 2 weeks, I discovered through the newspapers that our big boss, the assistant commissioner, had been suspended from duty because of transgressions on duty, using the police motor launch when he shouldn't have done, using a police vehicle to attend a rugby match, piffling little offences. There were still transgressions, but they, in the bigger scheme of things, someone of that rank would not normally have been held to account for those kind of transgressions. And the rumours quite spread that he had upset his colleagues by instigating the whole Bristol exercise. The Metropolitan Police was not ready for this kind of in-depth scrutiny and the resulting working groups and the change that was just down the road. It was not ready. And yes, he paid the price. But without a leader, we were kind of left to flounder. And it was an enjoyable time, but it was a frustrating time because everything we seemed to do was diluted and sanitized. And we had these great ideas. And unfortunately, when they returned from various committees, they weren't recognizable. They'd been diluted so much. So I spent 2.5 years working on the Bristol project. And the one real positive that came out of that Bristol project, I mean, yes, the report came out of it, and the kind of the evidence, if you like, the empirical evidence of what life was like within this service was like fantastic, right? And we needed that, and the whole experience was a really cathartic one. But we just felt let down, and black officers in general felt let down. And those cynical officers who said nothing was going to change, they were being proved right. But the one positive that came out of it was the camaraderie. We knew many more black officers across the river, to the north, to the south, than we'd ever known before. And George Roden had the idea of a reunion for officers that attended Bristol, which was a fantastic idea. And it really took off. And the reunions became regular social meeting points for black officers, and indeed members of the black and white community who were kind of our allies. Across London, we had some fantastic reunions at some really Strand Palace Hotel, Cumberland Hotel. We had some really grand affairs, really nice affairs, really smart affairs, and it caused a number of us to talk. And we began to socialize together outside of reunions, and it quickly became apparent, or it soon became apparent to me, that the reunions were not enough. Socializing was not enough. We had to think of taking it to the next stage. And George left the project team, which was being wound down. After about 2 years, it was being wound down, as is usual, these things. And I managed to hang on in there. But I thought, after I've left, there's going to be no black representation. So something had to be done. And I spoke to my superintendent at the time, who was quite quite liked the idea of black officers coming together and forming a body, if only to oversee the social functions, which we're becoming enormous, actually, hugely enormous. So anyway, I sent out a memorandum explaining to a number of key people that I thought were attending the Bristol reunions that we needed to come together as a network. If only to discuss the Bristol reunions, which George has now left, and we're still running, but it won't be long before I've left, and I don't know if we can run the reunions for much longer. And besides which, wouldn't it be nice to have a body, an advocacy body, to kind of lobby for change and to assist the Metropolitan Police. Anyway, I sent this out, and yeah, I've got a few responses. Which suggested that people did want to get together in this way. And then in April 1993, I sent out another memorandum inviting people to meet in a building in Pimlico, actually. Going back to Pimlico, police building in Pimlico, to discuss next steps, because Bristol had clearly not served us in the way that we expected. And that meeting in Pimlico at Drummond Gate in April 1993 was really the beginning of what's now known as the Black Police Association. That was the very first meeting, which then we met on a very regular basis, and we became a formal group, a formal entity. We drew up constitution, we became a membership organization, and it really all grew out of our perception that we've been let down. As Black people, we've been let down as an organization that had promised us change and didn't deliver on that promise. So we felt that we had no option other than to kind of represent ourselves, advocate ourselves, because singly we were being picked off. If Paul Wilson stood up and said something, he was shouted down. And that was our experience. But collectively, if Paul Wilson stands up saying he's representing the views of the Black Police Association, people listen. So that is how that change came about. And that was the start of the Black Police Association, which became, very high profile because of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. So although we were formally launched at New Scotland Yard in September 1994, big fanfare, commissioner, blah, 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 promises again. But after that, we were left to our own devices, and hardly any support. We were literally supporting colleagues who were feeling that they'd been discriminated against, given a hard time, and we were, offering support. And but the organisation wasn't supporting us as an executive. And it wasn't until 1997 that the Metropolitan Police obviously heard that the Home Secretary Jack Straw was going to introduce a public inquiry to look into the failings of the Metropolitan Police, and much wider than that, of the investigation into the murder of Black teenager Stephen Lawrence. Once the Metropolitan Police became aware that there was going to be this huge, probably the biggest inquiry in the Metropolitan Police history, that will be focusing on race, then who became very, very popular all of a sudden? The Black Police Association. They turned to us, and but we were having none of it. Basically, we were an independent body, and I was the chair of the Black Police Association at the time of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, and I also penned a report. It was a scathing report into life within the police service and the service that we delivered to our communities, particularly our Black communities. And within that report, I defined, institutional racism. And in the book, I go into so much more detail. I've made it sound quite simple. It wasn't as simple as that. Other people were involved, including an academic by the name of Robin Oakley, who we kind of, if you like, commissioned to assist us. But nevertheless, we, the Black Police Station, were keen to submit written evidence to the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, which we did. And then we were invited to give oral testimony, which we did. And I think it was the oral testimony that really kind of put the Black Police Association on the map, because we kind of articulated our experiences and the experience of many Black people within inside the police and those that were receiving a service from the police. And I described in detail, what institutional racism really looks like in that policing context. And and that was very painful for our parent organization. And, only recently, one of the deputy assistant commissioners, a gentleman by the name of John Grieve, said to me, he said, I was sat behind you at that inquiry. And I said, I know you were. I said, I was very aware that when we walked into the inquiry room, I said the number of white officers were to one side and we were to the other. But then those officers came to sit behind us. He said, yeah. He said, when you were talking, he said, one of my assistants leaned over and grabbed my notepad and scribbled on it, "This is very painful." He said, it was the first time she scribbled that. He said, and it wasn't the last. But, now, I think at the time it was painful for him as a senior officer. He didn't necessarily welcome that. But now he's had time to consider. And he feels that, yeah, it was the right thing to do. And he feels that we were very brave in doing it. And, and I certainly have no regrets. And we did get some flack. And unfortunately, the organization still didn't learn in the way was expected. And so, we're talking 1999 was when the inquiry, published its report and branded the police as being kind of institutionally racist. And, 22 years later, we're still quibbling over whether or not we understand what institutional racism means. Of course we understand, it's just that we refuse to, because we'd rather the status quo kind of continued. And so we're left with, a police service today that's kind of in crisis to a certain extent. But going back to my experiences, I stood down from the Metropolitan Black Police Association in 2000. I was then elected as the national chairman of the newly constituted Black Police Association, the National Black Police Association, that represented all, because initially we were the only Black Police Association, and then the people like Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire, Kent, and all the counties, they looked at us and thought, we need a voice. We need a voice. So they started setting up their own Black Police Associations. And then it was Jack Straw, actually. He was instrumental in bringing us all together as a national, which I didn't think was too healthy, because we were given an office at the Home Office. So as chair of the National Black Police, I had an office at the Home Office, and I never felt that was comfortable at all. I just felt that we were too close to government, and that we were being used, and I was proved to be right. And anyway, that is a whole different story, and probably one that I need to tell you on another day, actually. So okay, I hope you've enjoyed listening to my story, which really encapsulates my career up until the year 2000, when I stood down from the Black Police Association as its chairman. Obviously, there's much more to me, and I hope you can read my book.